Hello and welcome to the cast, episode 420. No, I'm just kidding. This is Cabbie Conversations. I'm joined, as usual, by my friend James.
Hello.
James, other than ripping a fat doobie, what do you do to relax?
I'm gonna say, first of all, I do not rap fat doobies.
Yeah, let's be clear.
But I think there's different kinds of relaxing. As an
Yeah.
introvert, I need time on my own quite a lot. So like often if I'm tired from work, but I know I've got to go out and socialize afterwards, I'll go take a nap.
Yeah.
A little 20-minute power nap, and then that gets me like my brain kind of ready to like move from like one sort of kind of stimulation to something else, which is far more enjoyable than say work. And I'd say I do enjoy relaxing with friends. That's probably my favorite way to relax. Probably going to the park and relaxing with friends is probably like one of my favorite things to do.
That's nice. Yeah, I think you're right. There's like many different types of relaxing. I'm definitely an introvert as well. I like talking to people, but after a while I get really drained, so I need to spend time on my own. And usually how I do that is either with a film or a game, which doesn't necessarily mean like when it's like relaxing. I don't know. I find that I either want to like put on a really relaxing film or game that doesn't require much sort of mental, if I'm really tired, or if it's like if I sometimes I just need something like that's why I play like really hard games, because it's like gives your mind something else to focus on, and it gives you like I don't really know how to describe it. It's like redirecting your focus in a way.
Yeah.
Some advice I would give, just like because I was talking to somebody recently who finds it really hard to relax. I say the first thing you should do is like either turn your phone off or put it in a different room, because like your phone is like the antithesis of relaxation. It's like constant stimuli, and like you don't need that.
No, for sure. I mean, you often go on there as a distraction, but then you end up feeling, especially on social media, which there is often a lot of pressure to be seen to be having a great time.
Yeah.
And then I find that the more I kind of get absorbed into like say somebody that I'm following, or I mean, I don't have a lot of social media for this reason.
Yeah.
But I then kind of, why am I not doing things like that? I feel like a bit of a failure. I've not done like an amazing charity bike ride or something like that.
Yeah.
So I don't really like. So I try. So yeah, definitely avoiding social media. Another thing I really like to do on my own is cook. I really like to take. Well, I think when we lived at university, Ed would kind of know that Mondays was the day that I cooked.
Yeah.
Thought about of action because I had like 3 things on the go.
Because it was a 2 meter by 2 meter kitchen, and he was like taking up the whole thing with his cooking.
Yeah.
It's good. I think cooking for yourself is very relaxing. I do find cooking for other people, while I do enjoy it, can be really stressful, because it's like shit.
Definitely.
If this isn't good, I'm gonna fucking hang myself. Like
yeah. The
okay.
embarrassment of cooking something bad, but I find chopping, if I'm like stressed or anxious or something, just going to chop some vegetables is like the most relaxing thing.
Yeah. I don't smoke that much, but I will say on very rare occasions I do like. This is the episode where it's confirmed that I'm an old man, but I really do like a cigar. That's always a nice. That's really nice to relax. I'm just going to double down here and say that it goes really well with a nice glass of whiskey. On very rare occasions. You are?
I'm so pleased my birthday present was a success.
Yeah, it's fucking great.
I
No,
introduced Ed to cigars.
it's great. It's I definitely don't like to do it very often because it's horrible for you. But
Yeah.
and I do, I suppose, partake in the occasional weed doobie.
You take in the occasional weed.
In the occasional weed strain. But that again, it's sort of on rare occasions. I try to avoid it wherever I can because you just don't really need it that often.
Well, I think with whatever substance you choose to take, it's important to do everything in moderation. Like most people really like to drink, but there's a difference between having, maybe a glass of wine on Friday night to then drinking a bottle of wine every night. There's a huge difference.
Yeah.
Like, and that's just something that as adults we have to just bear in mind with all of our habits, because everyone's got a vibe.
Yeah. Like everybody, even if it's not like a substance, it could be literally anything. It could be like a TV show or something like that. Like everyone has something that helps them get them through stuff, especially if you work long hours and things. Like sometimes you just need a little something. But I suppose that brings us nicely on to the main discussion, which is marijuana, the legality and the social issues surrounding it. So obviously, I guess for context, because times are sort of changing where a lot of states in America and some countries have legalized marijuana. Here in the UK, it still remains banned, illegal. However,
well, not all forms of marijuana.
No, true.
Well, I think we should first of all discuss like what are the two main components that are like hotly discussed in marijuana chemically. So marijuana or cannabis is made up of there are lots of different chemicals in marijuana which produce its like side effects. And the main two that everyone discusses is tetrahydrocannabinol and then just cannabidiol. So that's THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, and CBD, just cannabidiol. There's also something else called terpenes too, which is something that people don't talk about as much. But THC is the one that kind of makes you feel like high and fuzzy and like euphoric and giggly and gives you the munchies. Cannabidiol or CBD is the more relaxing one, makes you maybe helps reduce anxiety, might make you a bit more sleepy. It helps reduce pain and prevent seizures, which we can then talk about a bit later. Terpenes are really interesting. They're more about like flavor and scent. You can get a lot of different flavors and like scents like within different strains of marijuana, which is kind of a bit mind-blowing. If you thought of like marijuana like wine, it's quite a good way
of flavors.
There's lots of different flavors, scents, and these different components, such as something like limonene, which obviously has a citrusy sort of aroma, is also really helpful to reduce stress. And then there's another one I have for an example is something called terpinolene, which can have like an apple smell or cumin smell, and that can be really have antibacterial and fungal properties. So there's lots of different sort of chemical components that make up cannabis, which is why it's quite a complex. It's quite a complex.
Because you mentioned like it's not all illegal, so CBD is legal just on its own. Because it basically has no sort of intoxicating quality, like it doesn't get you high at all. But obviously the THC is what makes it illegal.
So some people smoke like hemp flowers, or they might have tea, or they might use CBD oil to help them with stress, or if if they epilepsy, they might take it.
Yeah.
But back to my point on like cannabis being potentially like wine, because there's two major different plant groups within cannabis. There's cannabis sativa or sativa weed or marijuana. And this leaf is cut. This is normally this plant is normally actually quite tall and has quite thin leaves, and it's often found in Africa, Central America, and Southeast Asia. It has a higher proportion of THC to CBD ratio, and it's often seen as quite energizing and meant to give you it gives you like a creative euphoric experience. So this one's kind of dubbed as like daytime weed. And then the other main strain or variety is Indica weed or cannabis indica, and this is typically found in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkey, and it's a much shorter plant with like stocky plant with leaves, and it's got a higher CBD proportion to THC, although we'll talk about that a bit more later. And that's more thought to have more relaxing properties and increases your appetite, so it's sort of dubbed nighttime weed.
Yeah.
And then over time there's been a lot of hybridization between the two species, so then there's a huge range of hybrids as well, and so they might be more sativa dominant or indica dominant.
Yeah, there's lots of varieties.
Like wine, that's how you
it is like wine. Yeah, I mean it's there's lots of stuff that goes into it. I guess I don't know if you wanted to touch on this, if you had anything else to say, but I was just going to go into sort of whether we think it should be legalized or not.
Yeah.
Unless you had any more general things to say about it, because I think it's good that people. One of the things I'll touch on later is that I don't think there's like that much information out there about weed in general, like there is for alcohol, say. So I think it's good that people understand like what goes into it and where it comes from and stuff like that.
Well, I think maybe if we were to like where weed comes from, like it's found all over the world, and there's been even like it's found across cultures all over the world, and I'm pretty sure that they found like cannabis resins and stuff in like that date back to the time that Jesus was in Jerusalem at the time. So
Yeah.
or like so if like it's existed throughout human existence, much like, because all cultures have a form of alcohol, all cultures have a form of bread as well. Those are found, whether it be ale or vodka or rice wine or all cultures have got. And another thing that's quite common is most cultures have a sort of other form of herbal stimulant, be it tea or coffee, whether they've got it through colonialization or that it's naturally grown. Like most these sort of like natural sort of drugs, because caffeine is a drug, it exists across culture, and cannabis is just another one. Another one you could have is ayahuasca, which is found in like which is more common, which is a hallucinogenic found in South America, specifically Peru, I believe. But the fact that you could say, oh, in the olden times we lived Puritan lives without all of these substances, completely not true.
I mean, there's even examples of like lots of psychedelics were used back in the day. Magic mushrooms, the equivalent back then. Like I'm pretty sure, and I was looking at this, I'm pretty sure like the first example of weed being illegal was like in the 1300s or something. So
really?
yeah,
That's
that was
really
like that's like how far this shit goes back.
Can you tell me the context of, or tell us the context of what that was, or
oh shit, hang on, let me get it up. It was but it's just funny, yeah, like how you say, like drugs I think have been a part of our culture for so long, because as long as you have like plants, basically there's so many different properties to lots of different
you can really knock yourself out. Like a plant that's indigenous to the UK that they used to use was foxgloves. You
Yeah.
know, like that they used to use it as sort of an anesthetic, but people also used to like take it to get high, but then they take too much and die. Like
Yeah.
it's the concept of us using medication from plants or whatever to escape reality in some form or another is completely not like within us as a species. It's not. I mean,
Yeah.
dolphins do it too. They play with pufferfish and
Yeah.
like chuck pufferfish, like get the pufferfish to blow up, and then like they chuck it towards each other because the poison makes them high. Or I mean, the poor pufferfish, or like
Yeah, I
cats
know.
obsessed with catnip. Like,
I just think it's funny how it's like evolution and gave it this toxin to stop them from being eaten, but I mean, it made the opposite happen. Like now they're being killed for fun, basically.
yeah,
It's fun, but yeah. I mean, I couldn't find that, by the way. I don't know where it's from, but
okay,
the obviously, as I mentioned, there's lots of countries that have completely legalized marijuana. Lots of states in the US. For example. But here in the UK, it's still illegal, other than CBD and some other, I think, specific instances of it. And I mean, it doesn't look to be. It doesn't look to be in the legislative calendar anytime soon, really.
no,
Even if there was some Labour victory in the near future, I don't think even then it would be anytime soon. But there is a big sort of cultural pushback against it. I just wondered, what do you think about that in general?
I think a lot of it comes from a sort of fear of
Yeah.
uh of drugs. I think a lot of it kind of because we're very socially entwined with America,
Mm.
who do have a more who have been branded with a more serious drug problem. I think I was actually watching a documentary on on like a lot of American politicians and the war on drugs. Um, and how like it was very much a fear mongering policy about linking drug use to crime when actually drug use is normally another sign of a mental health issue or something.
Yeah.
Um, so if we were to talk, and so I think as the UK psyche has sort of adopted this fear about drugs leading to gangs, crime, and dangerous people, which is
Mm.
not use it. I mean, gangs can be dangerous, absolutely, especially for young people who are groomed into them. Um, but but most drug users are pretty harmless in themselves. They just want to get high.
Yeah.
So I think that that's the fear on of drugs. However, keeping it illegal only but there's a huge demand for weed. The weed use has just gone up and up and up. Have you even like there's even a phrase for somebody who doesn't even like drink or take other drugs but smokes weed. It's called California sober. um
Yeah.
so I think, and like I've definitely known people who have not really drunk or done anything but have just smoked weed.
Yeah.
um so and that's in the UK where it's illegal. I think keeping it illegal is more dangerous personally.
Yeah. Well, you
uh,
mentioned like there's a fear that sort of this using drugs will sort of lead to, gang interactions and all this stuff. But really, though, if you think about it, if you want drugs nowadays, it's pretty easy. You could very easily get your hands on some weed, but you do have to interact with a drug dealer to do
Not
it.
even you can go on the
Well,
dark
no, maybe
net.
not necessarily, but that is how most people get it.
Yeah,
So my point is like you have to interact with somebody who themselves is usually connected to some sort of gang, or they have to get their drugs from somewhere, right? Like,
yeah,
let's not be naive about it. So
no,
my point is, well, if you want them to stop interacting with or reduce the risk of like going into a gang or whatever, wouldn't you make it legal? Because then you could just buy it in a shop and you wouldn't even have to interact with that sort of side of people. Like,
yeah.
if you introduce it to them in a more normal environment, quote unquote, like it's makes the most sense, really.
It can
Go on.
definitely you do. I don't think you entirely remove crime though. Basically,
No.
the crime sort of shifts because because in America where not all states have legalization, for example, I believe in Oregon marijuana is legal.
Yeah.
So where like what people do is they grow their cannabis, they grow their marijuana, and then because it's legal in that state, and then they smuggle it to other states where it's illegal and
Yeah.
make a huge profit because they can massively jack up the price.
Yeah.
So just because it's legal, I think when you say for example in the UK we're made up of 4 countries, it would have to be across all 4 countries, and but I could still imagine lots of then weed smuggling then going to Ireland or something.
Yeah. No, definitely.
So I think it would be very important for the British government to make sure that it was not, say, because if just Scotland legalized weed, although I can't really imagine.
I can't see that.
No. I can't. I don't think it's on the SNP agenda, but they think they want something else right now.
Yeah.
But if the SNP if the Scottish Parliament did legalise weed, it would then cause a lot of problems for marijuana use in England. A lot of the sources would then change.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to consider.
But ultimately, it would mean that less people in Scotland would be buying illegal weed and therefore supporting these gangs. Because gangs, where do you think they get their money from? Like, the drugs are where they get their money from. So if you were to make it legal, it just wouldn't have that problem. And and I agree, like if it was just one country that did it, there would be some smuggling. But if it was legal everywhere, like you say, it wouldn't have that problem.
Another issue that I could potentially see happening is so I believe in Canada, there's issues of marijuana or cannabis is legal in Canada, but drug dealers are still highly active in Canada. I think it's the same in Colorado. I read a news article on this because the cannabis companies, the cannabis shops, the coffee shops, they're highly taxed. So the weed is a lot more expensive in them, but your drug dealer can undercut that price and he delivers to your door.
Yeah.
So there is still very much a market for drug dealers within it, and some people, a lot of people who are drug dealers come from come from a less wealthy background, and so this is a way of them making a good income. But often what happens is when you legalize, and then if it's a small sort of group of people, they tend to not pose such a threat, especially if they're just say growing weed in their basement or their attic or something. But when it becomes like a big but what happens is then major corporations come in and buy over the weed business and basically take it over and leave these poor people still poor, which would have been actually potentially a viable opportunity for them.
No, that's very true. That's very true. You're it might sound weird to say, but yeah, you're sort of squashing smaller independent businesses. At least that's the case with some people. But I think ultimately, as your brother George said on the last episode, it's the prohibition effect. It would be stupid to say less people would smoke weed if you legalized it, because that's obviously not true. More people would smoke it. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
But the reality is they would be getting it from shops. I mean, it's hard to picture this sort of reality because it's so far off the books for us. But I imagine you get it from a shop, right? Like you would cigarettes or alcohol, and it would tell you how much THC is in it, much like it tells you how much alcohol percentage it is and whatever. and like, people would be making an informed purchase, and maybe they'll even take the cigarette approach and slap it with all sorts of warnings on the packet, like this will give
Yeah.
you psychosis or whatever. Like, so I just think like that's such a better alternative to getting something from somebody who maybe they just grew it themselves, but a lot of the time it is they get it from a gang who's then making money and causing actual crime, like robbing and stuff. You're supporting that, and you don't know what's in it, you don't know how strong it is, it could be way too strong for you. Like, there's so many mystery elements to it, like which is classically, as I mentioned in the last episode, like the prohibition effect means that the THC content in weed has gone up so much because it makes more sense to carry less but have a higher concentration if it's illegal. Which now means that because it has been illegal, the weed has gotten so much stronger and potentially a lot more dangerous because of the higher THC content.
No, that's very, very true. There was actually a really interesting Channel 4 sort of like investigation / debate. It wasn't dispatches like Jon Snow ran it. It was like a television trial, if you like.
Yeah.
And this was, I think I was about 15 when I watched this, so this must have been about 2013 or something. And Channel 4 investigated whether they should legalize all forms of cannabis, and so they dubbed it like bud cannabis, so like called it like skunk. And then there's also another form of weed called compressed cannabis called hash or hashish. And they basically did a trial where they got people, they got Jon Snow took part, and they got all participants to try both the skunk and the hash, and they basically monitored them before and after for side effects and things like that. And a lot of them were thought like that hash was actually pretty mega. Hash being a lot more.
Are you telling me that there's a Channel 4 documentary where Jon Snow gets fucking blazed?
Yeah, there is.
That's great.
And the kind of conclusion they came to was legalizing maybe more milder forms. Like, we've already legalized CBD. Like, maybe we would start legalizing something like hashish, which is more mellow than other forms of cannabis. And I definitely agree. The prohibition effect is a problem, because it. You actually sent me a really good video on this, or while we were doing research.
Okay,
about how if you it basically forces people to make a decision to either smoke really strong weed, which they might not want to do,
or none at all.
None at all. So say if we're talking about this like alcohol, like it kind of made the example of, personally, I really like beer, but I really struggle with harder drinks like whiskeys and vodkas and gins, and not really for me. But I'm very happy with my beer, which is about 5%, whereas if you take like a strong gin or vodka, that can be about 40% alcohol. So it's kind of the same. If you legalize, you basically open the door to more choice, and being able to have knowledge in what you take. Something it's actually a major issue because it's so new within legislation, whether it's in Holland or America and stuff. There are actually some laws about how strong things should be, or like dosage, and they're so, for example, this creates a really big problem for edibles. People really like edibles as an alternative option because lots of people don't like smoking. If you do consume edibles, the effect is slightly different. So you become high later. So when you smoke your marijuana, you get high in about, I'd say, 5-10 minutes. But if you were to eat it, it would take maybe 40 minutes to an hour and a half for it to really kick. And the high is far more intense. And so this can cause a number. But in Holland, for example, they're not allowed to extract the oils such as THC and CBD, in that it has to always be like whole leaf, which therefore means they can't do proper they can't do proper chemistry on these drugs, and they can't find like suitable concentrations that would
Yeah.
and also it means that like they all still sort of taste of weed. Like
Yeah, it's
like
not what you want.
which is not something that people would necessarily want. Whereas if you extracted the oils, you remove a lot of the sort of other flavors. I guess it would be like having oregano cookies, like
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a good point because like I remember reading that like I guess it's jumping ahead a bit, but like people say that marijuana is a gateway drug, but that really the gateway drug is smoking cigarettes. And once you sort of made that leap into smoking just something, that's what makes you sort of want to move on. So if you encourage people to instead do edibles, you're probably eliminating a lot of people that might go on to like try harder stuff because it's such a
Yeah,
different like it's such a different experience really like
it is.
to smoking. And like what you said earlier, like I think it's a real shame because I think a lot of people I imagine have like a beer after work. I don't, but a lot of people say they do that, just like one or two, because it's just something to like
Yeah,
take the edge off. But you can't really do that with weed because it's like too strong. It would be like having a glass of vodka after work or something. So
well,
if you
I
had
think
it
it just
so you could either have an edible or you could have like basically a lower THC version of weed, that would be a lot better.
yeah.
It would discourage people from basically over smoking because you never really know how much is too much. You know how much is too much with alcohol because it's so like everybody knows. But like because weed is illegal, it's like still very up in the air. So very easy to sort of go overboard.
Yeah, you don't know how much is too much. I
Yeah.
think um I think also when you become, if the more you smoke, like most things, the more tolerant you are. So some people, I do know plenty of people who will wake up, what's it called, wake and bake.
Yeah.
They'll wake and bake, they'll go to work, they'll finish their shift, and then they'll have another one after work, and then maybe another one before they go to bed. So there's plenty of people who have a pretty strong habit.
Yeah.
But I think it would kind, I don't know, with more education, more awareness, which we can't have with legalization because we can't really do research.
Yeah.
It would make dosage and awareness much better. So for example, for edible dosage in like Colorado, Oregon, things like that, the dosage like it would be like they're all different. So like what's like about how much is a safe amount to put in an edible and things like that, it varies wildly, and that can cause a lot of problems because thing is with edibles can pose more risk because people go, oh, that's really, if it's like a sweet or a cake, you might go and you buy like say it was a batch of brownies or and I bought 10 brownies, I might eat 4.
Yeah. That's because you're a greedy fuck though.
And like then you would like, you can't die from eating too much cannabis, but the experience would be really unpleasant.
Yeah.
So that would mean that like, and because they can't, and so that there's just still a lot of debate about dosage because there isn't at least in America, federalized legalization is still relatively new. So it's not really understood what should happen. But
You
something
mentioned as well one of the other problems with edibles is like it's poses a greater risk to children and stuff.
yeah.
Particularly if you were to like sell them in shops or even like a bakery, I guess it would certainly, I think, like, well, it would be like selling cigarettes, I suppose, in a bakery. It's like I think it exposes young people to it earlier.
Yeah.
But I suppose the reality is like it really most of the time from every study it's shown that it doesn't really come from external sources. It really comes from like whether your parents do it, you know. So I guess that's really what it comes down to.
I think it would be sort of, well, I think I think my mum tells me a story about when about her dentist, and her dentist would go to the shop with her like toddler son, and mum would the dentist would pick out a bottle of wine, and the toddler would go, "Oh, mummy's juice,"
Yeah,
like
God.
instead of like, which kind of like shows that like children, that he was aware that this was for adults and that. But the thing is, if you just leave sweets, say if it was because you can get edibles as sweets, if
Yeah,
you don't put them in a secure place, and your maybe 4-year-old or something doesn't know, thinks, oh, sweets, great, because like what's
yeah.
not like sugar, um and they eat it, and then maybe they eat the whole pack, or maybe they just eat one. It's incredibly distressing.
Yeah,
And then that then becomes like, that would be like discovering your toddler's drunk a liter of vodka or something. That
yeah.
that's a really, that's also like then becomes like a social services issue,
Mm,
um because you've exposed your child to like to significant harm, and although the effect for you might have only been quite mild, you've got to remember that like the metabolism and the internal workings chemically of a child,
yeah.
the
And a
physiology
quarter of the size of you.
is completely different, and they have different, because they're doing things like growing and learn, and like their brains learning and adapting very quickly. The effects are very, very
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, no matter what drug it is, countless studies have shown that if you're exposed to any sort of drug while you're developing, that can have, it does often have quite negative impacts. So there's absolutely no question that, like, if you were to legalize weed, it should remain like 18, 16 and plus at the very least, like it is with alcohol and cigarettes.
Mm.
Um, uh, but this is the thing, I think, like, I think there's just that whole aspect of people not knowing what the rules are. Like, um, because it's illegal, no one's really willing to talk about it. No one's really willing to educate you. You might get like one drug education class in school, but really those resort to don't do them, you know,
Yeah.
like, and that doesn't help because people will do them anyway. Like, and what you need to know is like how much is too much, like when to stop, when to know if you're addicted to it and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Because
Well,
while weed is obviously isn't like itself addictive, like chemically, but it can be psychologically addictive, much like
mm.
anything. Um, and this is the problem. I think this is what the problem it comes down to. Like you mentioned, also like it's harder to. It's classically very hard to sort of get reliable data on the effects of weed because it's illegal. Like there's countless studies on what alcohol does to you, but I mean, there was arguments originally about like schizophrenia and like there's so many different things that have been claimed to be associated with weed that it's really hard to know what's actually true anymore because it's really hard to like get funding for experimenting on an illegal drug. Like,
Yeah.
uh, if it was to be legal, then it would be a lot easier to know what the actual effects are.
Do you know what's actually a bit mad that the government doesn't want? The government's like, the UK is like one of the biggest exporters of medical marijuana around the world.
Really, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but like it's illegal here to smoke.
No, it's ridiculous.
um,
And
which is crazy. But there is definitely, I think, yeah, the health and development of somebody with marijuana is definitely an important point, like you mentioned. Psychosis and schizophrenia have been long like linked to marijuana use, but some people, like, there is often believed to be there is a genetic basis in like schizophrenia. So
yeah,
what happens with a lot of like psychosis and things is there is like a sort of genetic basis for it, and what happens is then like there's a triggering event, and
mhm,
this could be a really traumatic incident, or it could be cannabis, that could be that triggering incident, and that then therefore causes the psychopathology to basically start.
yeah.
It then triggers schizophrenia, psychosis, schizoaffective disorder, etc., etc., etc.
Right,
Whereas
but
it
the
wouldn't.
idea that it just causes it on its own is like kind of laughable now.
Yeah, it's largely unfounded. So there is definite it. So the fact, so there is a link, but it might just be like, oh, if you have a like a family history of psychosis, then yeah, you shouldn't touch cannabis. But
absolutely.
but that's like saying if you have like a really, really sensitive or overloaded liver, you shouldn't drink.
No,
you know?
exactly.
There's that like with all of these other things, or if you really suffer from panic attacks, then maybe drinking loads of caffeine is not a good idea.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, that's so true. It's I think the bottom line is just like, just because something's legal doesn't mean it's safer.
no.
This is just anecdotal, but I know lots of people that say, oh, I would never do any drugs. That's just, that's horrible stuff. And then they'll go out on a weekend and drink like 20 pints. And, it's like, society has basically conditioned you into thinking that that's acceptable, whereas weed is somehow not. And obviously these things, they're all drugs. Like, they all have their potential problems, but like, at the same time, we live in a free society where if you want to go out and drink 10 pints, then that's your right to do so. I think, like, for me, as I've mentioned a couple of times before on the podcast, the idea of some old men in government telling me what I can and can't do in my free time that doesn't affect anybody else, like, telling me that I can't do that is a big problem for me. Like, um, like, that's ultimately what it comes down to. Like, you should have the ability to make your own decisions, even the wrong decisions. Because if we were all healthy, Puritan individuals, well, bars wouldn't exist. Put it that way.
Definite prostitutes wouldn't exist either.
Yeah, exactly. And so you might be wondering, I guess, or you might be curious why this is such a big issue today to begin with. So if you will allow me, I'll give you a little history lesson, shall I?
Yeah, go for it.
In 1971, President Nixon said that drug abuse was public enemy number one. And that sort of kickstarted this whole campaign in America called the War on Drugs. Reagan effectively doubled the law enforcement budget for drug offenses, which led to an absolutely insane increase of incarcerations, including non-violent drug offenses, which is a large part of the reason why America has such a high prison population, is because they have such high sentences for drug offenses. Now, it was actually caused, at least in part, by a few years prior. There was a lot of growing media coverage about the sort of crack epidemic. It was definitely, like you say, it drove sort of public fear that this was going to like take over. And if you know anything about politics, it's very good to be sort of like, to present yourself as like the answer to people's fears, basically. So that's what Reagan did. He presented himself as having a hard stance on drugs, insisting on law and order, and all this stuff. And a very large part of it as well was to do with racial connotations. There was something called the Southern Strategy used by Republicans back in the day, where there was basically a shift in terms of the public eye, where essentially I'll give you a direct quote from a Nixon advisor, John N. Rickman. He said, the Nixon campaign had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We knew you couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night. So if you think that, I guess my point in all this is basically, if you think that drugs are illegal for any reason that involves the government actually caring about your health, you really need to, you're wrong.
Yeah,
It's all about optics. They know that people don't like drugs, and that's because they've instilled a fear in people about drugs. You know, some is well founded, but you know, a lot of it is fear mongering.
and
And yeah, go on.
a lot of it's is to do with social ties,
Yeah,
to do race or wealth or like.
yeah,
So from that story, like if we were to talk primarily just about cocaine for a second, you could get the same prison sentence for, say, I think it was 1 ounce of crack cocaine would get you the same prison sentence as somebody who had 100 ounces of powdered cocaine. Crack
yeah,
cocaine mostly found in black communities, and powdered cocaine mostly found in white suburban communities.
yeah.
Um, so that really goes to show that the war on drugs, or being anti legislation for a lot of drugs, is to do with other social issues,
Yeah.
and not and prejudices, and not necessarily to do with the actual substance itself.
No,
Um,
exactly. It was a way of sort of appealing to the Southern, that's why it's called the Southern strategy. It was a way of appealing to working class, previously Democrat people in the South who, well, like they said, they couldn't just say, well, it's illegal to be black, but, you know, by then associating them with drugs and making them illegal, you sort of subtly communicate to the Southern people, like, oh, they're on my side. They hate black people as well, basically. And that's
yeah,
still, it's easy to forget that that rhetoric really does still exist today. Maybe it's not so much the case in Britain. I mean, maybe I'm being optimistic, but I think in Britain it's more so the case that people just have like are scared of drugs, basically. I don't know
yeah,
if it necessarily has that much ties to race, but certainly in America that was the case. It still is, I would argue. Um,
yeah.
and this is not to mention, like, I mean, it's estimated that like what $1 trillion has been spent since 1971 on the war on drugs. An average of 50 billion a year is spent. Like, if you think about what do you think the police in this country included, like, what do you think that they spend most of their time doing? It's like going after fucking drug dealers. Like, they could be sorting out actual crime and like
There
doing
was
their
that.
actual job.
Yeah, I mean, there was actually a really interesting case in London this year by the other week. There was basically a breach of corruption within the police. So there was a corrupt police officer who worked for a gang, and what he would do was intercept.
Are you sure this
Um,
isn't Line of Duty?
no. This is an actual thing. I saw it on
Okay.
BBC um, this corrupt cop with British police officer would go in and intercept um, drug deals, and basically confiscate the drugs, and
Hmm.
like for money, and then sell them back
Yeah,
for more. Um, and he was doing this with a gang, and so his gang was making a huge profit, but he was doing this through the police.
that's
Um,
mad.
it's really bad, but the concept that necessarily the law isn't on your side is not true to do with drugs either. Often this was documented in America that cops were like paid off to turn a blind eye to crack initially, before it became more of a racial thing. Um,
Yeah.
like for example, at like a place where I used to work, there was a bouncer, and he used to catch people at the establishment I worked doing drugs, and he would confiscate the drugs off them, and then say, "Give me 70 quid, and I'll let you back in." Like,
Yeah, yeah, that happens all the time.
um, so I think like have it making weed, keeping weed illegal is it just it keeps corruption very much
Yeah. encourages these shitty practices, like
exactly.
basically. But yeah, it's
So
all a bit strange. It's you know, it's very easy, I suppose. I was guilty of this as well. I don't know, just thinking that like just being easy, very easy to be sort of susceptible to the idea of, if something's illegal, it's bad, basically. Whereas society shapes the law, or at least that's how it should be. The government can't tell you what's right or wrong, ultimately. Like, and to me, this is one of the, to be fair, one of the few remaining areas where I think that the government is just really, really far behind socially. Because to be fair, I mean, it took them some time, don't get me wrong, like gay marriage, for example.
And they're just ending conversion therapy now.
Yes, that's very true. It's just one of the many areas, I suppose, that just shows how antiquated the law can be.
Definitely.
It's a real shame.
I think if we were to look at it politically, I'd say our parents' generation, so maybe baby boomers, and what's it, Gen X, I would say are all probably pretty anti-drug.
Yeah.
Maybe some of Gen X aren't because they were part of rave culture. Quite a lot. They were like the cutoff at the end of Gen X would have been part of the rave culture scene.
Yeah.
But millennials, I'd say Gen Z are probably on the whole more relaxed about substances.
Yeah.
Including cannabis. And so I think as our voting population, as baby boomers, Gen X, the pre-war era age out, I think there will probably be a change, and politics will change, and maybe in like a couple of decades, marijuana will be legalized. But I think it'll take more young people being able to vote, or people of our generation being able to vote.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I think what's quite interesting about the worries about addiction and stuff is addiction or dependency is often tied to social dysfunction. So being incredibly isolated, being part of an abusive, say like a violent or abusive, they're unhealthy coping strategies.
Yeah.
So whether or not you agree with marijuana use, it could be alcoholism, which is legal, or something like these dependencies are often as a result of maladaptive coping strategies for trauma. And so what they do, that Portugal very famously in 2001 decriminalized possession of all drugs. That includes heroin. What they then focused on instead was a rehabilitative approach. And of course there was originally more people doing drugs, but the levels of addiction decreased. And so although more people were using, they were better educated on the potential risks and of taking drugs, and then if they needed help was more readily accessible.
Also sterile needles for heroin, because so many people were dying of HIV.
Yeah.
And obviously then, like, when they went in to get a needle, they would have like the opportunity to talk to somebody, and like in the long run, that's what really makes the difference. Like you said, I think emotionally, any sort of addiction, I think, really does come from some incapacity or feeling of like ineptitude or something, something within yourself emotionally that goes a lot deeper than just the drug being nice. Because what drug you get addicted to is really a matter of choice. Not a matter of choice, it's a matter of complete chance. Like, it's just whatever you have first, basically. So yeah, it's really a much deeper issue, and just slapping the illegal label on it doesn't solve anything.
No.
To be aiming to help people, because in Portugal, I think a lot of the large part of the reason that they did that, well, A, because it was such a big problem, but B, it was just they were spending so much money on it, like law enforcement, and it wasn't working. So they instead spent all that money on this rehabilitation effort, which is obviously a lot more fruitful. It's really mind blowing when you. It's I guess people just can't wrap their head around that, like making things legal, like just all of it, but it does work. I don't know.
I think it kind of goes to show that policy that is loving and inclusive ends up bettering the rest of society. And I don't know whether you will. So I think with legalization, I think it would overall. I think legalization personally is a good thing, but that doesn't mean there aren't risks to legalization. Something I guess but there are other far more dangerous, like you can die of drinking too much alcohol. Alcohol basically ends up suppressing your breathing and you die from just stop breathing. You can take too much caffeine and die. People, like, I saw an article about it the other week where a guy drank, I think it was a liter of Red Bull a day for 2 years and died.
Jesus.
You can obviously die from taking a paracetamol overdose. It destroys your liver function. There's been no recorded deaths due to cannabis. Yes, there have been some unpleasant side effects, but in general, people who smoke cannabis are not violent. They're not dangerous. People who drink alcohol can be incredibly dangerous. They can do really stupid. I mean, what's it? The student accident. It's like, oh, I got really drunk and jumped off a wall.
What are you referring to there?
I don't know.
Just a random example, yeah.
But it's well known that, or like Brits abroad, Europe, like, have sort of love-hate relationship with British tourists, because although they come with lots of money, they get famously drunk and are really rude. So it's like I think, people who smoke, you don't have the same. You have different. No. There'll be different social issues that will arise with cannabis, but I don't think those risks are any greater or any worse than anything else that is currently legal on the market. For example,
the worst thing that being high does is just make you laugh at stuff that isn't funny, and generally quite lazy. It doesn't make you dangerous. I mean, unless of course you're driving or something, which obviously you should never do. Do not any substance like that, but just on its own, like, it makes you fucking lazy, so you're never gonna like fight somebody because of weed or something like that.
No, you'd rather eat a tub of ice cream, thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, did you have anything else to add?
No, I think we covered what I wanted to say.
Yes. Other than Cabbie's Conversations does not endorse drug use, heavy drug use at least.
If you need help, go seek help through, I think, Narcotics Anonymous, or go talk to your
GP. They'll never. I mean, I know we just said up all this stuff about being illegal, but realistically, I mean, I think there's a bit of a misconception where if you admit to somebody that you've done drugs or something because you need help, that you'll get like arrested. I know I used to think that.
That won't happen in the UK. There has been documented cases of that happening in the US, but that will not happen in the UK. The doctor is not allowed to tell law enforcement.
Exactly.
Look after your health. That's really important.
So if you need help, then there's absolutely no reason not to go to your doctor, and stuff like that. Like, and just in general, like, everything in moderation. Like, if you know that you're doing it too much, if you know that you're really struggling with it, then like just go out and get some help.
Mm-hmm. What's the gambling? When the fun stops, stop.
Yeah, basically, when it becomes like a habit, like when it becomes like something you can't live without, and maybe you should take a break or stop altogether. But yeah, thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.